Hi everyone, I'm Holly and you're watching Library at the Edge of the World. Today I wanted to have a little chat with you about the Man Booker Longlist. I was really interested and excited to see the Longlist when it came out this year, mostly because I've read quite a lot of contemporary fiction over the past year, so I was interested to see what books that I'd already read might crop up on there. So there were two books on the list that I had already read, one being A Little Life and the other being The Chimes. There were a few that weren't on the list that I was a little bit disappointed about, including The Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Faber, A Place Called Winter by Patrick Gale. Maybe that one didn't go quite far enough in terms of sort of literariness, but I really loved that story and thought that it was very compelling. So I did hope that that might be on there. The other one being The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. That one I think really does do some interesting things with language and playing around with expectations. So I was a bit disappointed not to see that one on there, but then again, Kazuo Ishiguro has won the Booker Prize in the past and he's been shortlisted several times as well. So since the long list was announced, I've read two more books from it, one being The Moor's Account by Leila Lalami and the other one being The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma. Three of these I read as physical books. I don't have the Chimes with me because I read an advanced reader's copy back in New Zealand, and The Fisherman I read as an audiobook. So I'm going to chat about these in reverse order. So the first one is The Moor's Account, which I finished a couple of days ago. This is historical fiction. To be honest, I probably wouldn't have picked this up unless it had been longlisted. Also, Jenny from Adultish Books did a great review on this. This is a very well researched book. It's about real events and it's about Spanish going to the New World. This focuses on a particular expedition and it's one where most of the crew died fairly early on from disease or from conflicts. And it tells you in the blurb, 4 people survive, 3 of whom are noblemen. All of them wrote their own accounts of what happened, and the 4th being a slave whose voice was never heard. So this is what this is. It is a fictionalized account of this slave. So of course, because of this perspective, we get some really interesting insights into cultural dynamics and this sort of clash of cultures. Estebanico, who is the slave, has quite a different perspective on life to his nobleman comrades, and they do become more like comrades as the book progresses, and that's a really interesting thing to see, is that because of their circumstances they're basically all brought to the same level, and it doesn't matter about class anymore, it doesn't matter about their skin colour, they're just all in this weird messed up kind of boat together and they just have to do the best that they can to get by. So that's something that I really enjoyed seeing, and that's something that Lalami has really created very masterfully. The other interesting thing is that we have this kind of dual narrative to begin with. We've got the story that's happening in the present, and then we've got these flashbacks to how Estebanico got where he is. And I found this backstory really interesting. It's about at the midpoint where these two stories converge, and then we just go on with the one present day story. I say present day as in meaning the present day of the book itself, because this is historical fiction. So I gave this book 3 stars out of 5, and it's not that I didn't enjoy it, it just didn't have that same emotional impact that some of these others have. It's very good, it's very well researched, and it does have some level of emotional impact, but I just felt like there was a bit of distance between that emotional side and the reader. That may just be me, and it may just be the way that I read it at the time. Maybe I was comparing it too much to A Little Life, I don't know. The other thing that slightly annoyed me was that it felt like the author assumed that you already knew a certain amount about this history. And I don't really feel like I know a lot about Spanish conquistadors in the New World. I know a little bit about Tenochtitlan because I did some art history stuff surrounding that during my degree, but I felt like I was missing out on some of the historical references because I didn't know who some of these characters were, and they were real life people. But aside from those things, it is a really good read. I would recommend it if that sort of thing sounds like your cup of tea, and if you like historical fiction. So next up we have The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma. This is a book about 4 brothers and a prophecy that threatens to tear them apart. This is another really well crafted novel, and I loved the way that different elements of folklore and fairy tale and also political elements were all woven into one. There's a lot going on in this book. It's not just about the 4 brothers, it's also about their extended family and how this prophecy influences them. So it really has this rippling effect. It's a great demonstration of brotherhood and friendship. Like in the Moor's account, I think it would be helpful to know more about Nigerian history before reading this, because there are some sort of political side stories and that kind of ties in with the book as a whole. We've also got this real fable-like element of it, this idea of fate and of predestination, and it's unclear if the prophecy is something that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or if this man who makes the prophecy is actually psychic in some way. So like in the Moor's account, I did feel like I was a bit removed emotionally from the story, and I think that's because of the kind of fairy tale aspects of it. In fairy tales, because they're often sort of moral stories or they're meant to be representative of something larger, you don't really connect with the characters on an emotional level, and I definitely felt that with this. Jen Campbell, who is one of the official Man Book of Loggers for this year, has done a wonderful review looking at these different elements of the book, and I will link that in the description because she does a much better job than I could of unpacking all of this. Okay, so the third book, or the second book that I read, because we're doing this in reverse order, was The Chimes by Anna Smale, and Anna Smale is a New Zealand author. Some of my colleagues had read it before me and I wanted to sort of be able to discuss it with them. Unfortunately, I didn't really get that opportunity to discuss it with them because I finished it just as I was leaving. So I will discuss it with you instead. So this is set in a future London where this giant musical instrument controls people's minds. It's very much a dystopian novel in that sense. I felt like this book was divided into two distinct parts. The first part is very literary, very strange, very dreamlike. It really reminded me of Kazuo Ishiguro's The Buried Giant because of what it does with memory, and it's very beautifully written. Because we've got this musical instrument that's controlling people, a lot of the slang that the people in the novel use, and they're all quite young, they're teenagers, the slang that they use is musical terminology. So we have all these Italian terms, and as a musician myself, I find this really interesting. It really it flowed beautifully, and I loved the language. The first half for me was a 5-star read without a doubt. I know that a lot of people haven't liked the first half though, because basically we have no idea what is happening. It's strange and dreamlike, and people keep forgetting what they've done, and the reader has to sort of pick up on little things that are mentioned, and then you get to the second half and everything very quickly picks up pace, and I felt like I'd been thrown into a young adult dystopian novel. The pacing of it and the way that one thing sort of rolls onto the next did feel like reading something like The Hunger Games, and this dystopian setting really did add to that. The language is not as poetic in the second half as well, because we got this pickup in pace, and I felt like that was a shame because I was so enjoying the first half of it. I didn't dislike the second half. I just didn't think that it matched up to the first, and it didn't live up to that for me. So overall, I gave this a 3 or 3.5 star because I couldn't discount the fact that the first half was absolutely just stunning. I later found out when I heard Anna Smale speaking at the Auckland Writers' Festival that she actually wrote this as a young adult novel, and that was how she handed in her manuscript. Her publishers decided that no, it was better off to market it as literary fiction. I don't think this would have gone down well had it been marketed as a young adult novel, because that first half of it is so very strange. I think that would have put people off. The first half certainly is not typical for young adult fiction, but then the second half is much more like YA, and it has some of those tropes that we often do see in YA novels. I'm not saying that it has a lot of tropes, but there were a few things that I noticed. So I was pretty surprised to see this on the Man Booker Longlist, because I knew this thing about it, that it had been written as a YA novel, and the Man Booker is for literary fiction. I completely agree that the first half of it certainly does belong on the long list. I'm just not so sure about the second half. But I'm super excited to see what Anna Smale does next, because she writes just like a dream. It's wonderful. So you should definitely pick this up, and don't let my criticisms put you off, because it is a fantastic book. Speaking of fantastic books, this was the first book that I read that was then put onto the long list. A Little Life by Hani Yanagihara. This basically does all of the things that I've criticised about the other ones, so that's why I've put it last. Like the first two novels that I've talked about, this is set in a certain time period, but it also has this sense of being out of time. I heard Hani Yanagihara speak at Foyles last week, which was so good. It was so good. I was very, very, very excited about it, and I got it signed as well. She talked about how she sort of saw this as a fairy tale, but a modern day fairy tale where the person just doesn't get better, and it is to do with abuse, so trigger warnings galore for this one. I know I've talked about this in the past a lot, but I wanted to talk about it in relation to the other books on the long list that I've read. So in placing this outside of time, she kind of avoids what she described as lazy writing, which is where you put it in a certain time period and then you have, for instance, 9/11 happening, and it's left to the reader to fill in those blanks, those emotional blanks, and she didn't want that as an interruption in this. So even though this would have been set during that time and 9/11 would have happened at some point during this novel, it's never mentioned. So that was something that I found slightly strange to begin with this, is that timelessness, but having heard her speak, and especially comparing it to the other Man Booker Longlist ones that I've read, I think that was a really, really wise decision. I've never read a book that is so emotionally affecting as this one. I think that this goes above and beyond what I thought literature could do emotionally. It's not a perfect book by any means, but it just does something, and she does these characters so very, very well. And I could honestly believe that they existed in the world. So yes, this is definitely my pick for the Man Booker Prize 2015. I highly doubt that any of the other books on the long list could possibly live up to this. Do I think it will win? Maybe not. I think that it will be shortlisted. I don't know if it is what the judges will be looking for. But as far as I know, this is kind of the people's choice, and I can definitely see why. So there we have it. Those are the books from the Man Booker long list that I've read so far. There are some others that I'm interested in reading, but yes, no promises about getting any more of the long list read before the shortlist is announced. I hope that you've maybe found this useful. Do go and check out Jen's channel and her reviews. She's going to be posting more reviews on the long listed books, likewise with all the other Man Booker vloggers. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye!